If you're a trumpet player out there, all I gotta do is say one word and you're gonna sit straight up. Are you ready? Here's that one word, brownie. That's right, Clifford Brown. Born in 1930 and named Clifford Benjamin Brown. He's a Delaware person, Wilmington, Delaware, as a matter of fact, where he was kind of born and raised. In a kind of a musical family. His father was a musician, and you know, to make ends meet, everybody got to work. Yeah, back there in 1930, this after the crash, and you know, we got some serious economic problems in this country. Not like today where we like, oh, we got a little inflation. No, we had some serious problems. People jumping off buildings and stuff. It's a serious problem. So Dad organized his 4 sons into a singing group, including little Clifford. So they out there singing on corners, collecting whatever chips they can, so they can go back home and hopefully get some meat and potatoes or bread or something out of the deal, maybe some heavy bread. Some of you old cats will know what heavy bread is. At any rate, somewhere around 10, Clifford sees something shiny his dad's been hiding from him. What's that? Well, it's a trumpet. Dad was a kind of a trumpet player, amateur trumpet player. And Clifford saw that thing, he liked the way it looked. So he started playing trumpet in school at age 10. And Dad didn't pay too much attention to him for a couple, 3 years. However, by the time Clifford was 14, Dad goes, shoot, I need to invest in this boy. He got some potential, y'all. Okay. So now, Clifford gets his own trumpet, because Daddy ain't let him touch his. He's still 14, okay? You can't touch my stuff. I will get you your own trumpet. And I will get you private lessons to make sure that you're getting the right information so you develop into a really good player. Well, good player is the understatement, because you will find out later. Trumpet players already know. So, by high school graduation, Clifford is already traveling from Wilmington up to Philadelphia playing, because his teacher realized what potential Clifford had, that even while he was still in high school, he started using him as a second trumpet player in his band and taking him to gigs in Philadelphia. By the time Clifford graduates from high school, these trips to Philadelphia become even more frequent, because Philly was a really hot jazz town and it wasn't that far away, and he could hang out with the really, really great cats, rub elbows with the big guys and the up and coming guys and the whole thing. Now, Clifford did come from one of those stable Methodist families, Methodist families, AME. And that's African Methodist Episcopal, for those that don't know. At any rate, he ends up going to Delaware State. I'm not sure what for. You don't know how far he went. Don't think it was music. I don't know if Dad would want him to really be a musician. But he ended up spending more time in the Maryland State University campus, because they had a 14-piece jazz band. And so he'd be leaving Delaware, going up to Maryland to play with that band. And I guess at some point, Delaware State and Maryland State both fell behind Clifford's vision, and he's now playing with the pros. At some point, he ends up in California. Matter of fact, a few New York cats ended up in California. Max Roach ended up out there. And Clifford ended up out there. And Art Blakey ended up out there. A lot of cats ended up out there. And so all the guys are hanging out and doing their things, and Max and Clifford decide they want to put a group together. But they don't know exactly what they want it to be because they both have these, the minds of an explorer. They both want to experiment with the music and take it to the next level. Max is already doing that with his concepts on the drum set, and rhythm and whatnot, and shadings and colors. And Clifford had his own thing that was going on. But first, before he and Max put a group together, he ended up being in the first iteration of the Jazz Messengers with Art Blakey and Curtis Russell and cats like that. And they ended up recording an album live at Birdland, I think. And this put the Messengers on the map, elevated Bohena to a higher level, and introduced the world to a revolution known as Clifford Brown. Oh yeah, Clifford was a bad cat and everybody knew it immediately. But the journey continues. He wasn't satisfied with being in what was at that time people the hottest quintet around, the Messengers, because it limited him from what he really wanted to do. After all, he's not just a trumpet player, he is also a composer. He'd had an accident somewhere around 1950, and Dizzy had come to see him to encourage him to be a musician and to encourage him to spend time on that piano, just like Dizzy encouraged Miles to spend time at the piano, which is why both Miles and Brownie ended up being very good composers. Dizzy, man, he knew what to tell him to do. Because if you're composing, you're going to copyright this stuff, you're going to get some royalties from it, blah, blah, blah. You're going to be able to eat steak, baby. All right, so this is what's going on. Later on, other trumpet players started embracing him and telling him, man, you got it. You go ahead and do this. As a matter of fact, in an interview, and later in the 50s, he was called, I think Leonard Feather called him the new Dizzy. Oh yeah, he had chops like that. But he also had flawless technique. When they were recording and rehearsing for that live album at Birdland, Miles Davis happened to come into the rehearsal area. And he heard Clifford playing the trumpet. And I can't use the words that Miles used, because those of you who know that Miles was not a Methodist. He was not a church boy. He was not. And Miles had some things to say about Clifford that is playing out of that trumpet, man. I can't believe all the notes that are coming out with all that fire. In other words, he's trying to say that the man played trumpet like a machine. He could not believe how fast and clean he could play the full range of the horn. Miles was like, oh my God, what is this cat, a robot or something? With a heart and a soul, composer, tunes like Jordu, tunes like The Hound, and a tune he wrote for a young lady who we'll talk about soon, Joy Spring. Now, in fact, we'll talk about it now. Somewhere around 1954, while he was hanging out with musicians and whatnot, Max introduced him to a young lady. And man, they fell in love. And not long after, they got married. But it was strange, because him being a Methodist and her being a Catholic, you had two separate beliefs about marriage and the doctrine and the whole celebration and all that stuff. And they wanted to have church weddings, but they had to have two church weddings, because he had to have his Methodist thing and she had to have her Catholic thing. Of course, she was a West Coast girl and he was East Coast, so you all got the whole family thing. Long story short, they ended up getting married 3 times in order to satisfy all the religious convictions that were necessary and the legality of it. And he loved her so much that the tune Joy Spring is written for her because that was his nickname for her, Joy Spring. She is bringing him joy like a spring continually. Yeah, the man knew how to love. At any rate, they're hanging out at jam sessions. And they're really doing it. A lot of cats are coming through, all these experimental guys that are doing what they can do here and there. And in that situation, they meet Harold Land and Curry Russell, and by the time they're ready to start their Clifford Brown Max Roach group, Bud Powell's young brother, Richie Powell, comes all the way from Philadelphia to California just in the nick of time, and he becomes a piano player. And all of this takes place because the great alto saxophonist, multi-instrumentalist, Eric Dolphy, is having these great jam sessions on the West Coast, and all these hot cats, experimental cats, are showing up. And these are the cats that Clifford and Max chose their band from. Oh yeah. And what a band it was. You got some jamming players, you got some fresh compositions coming from Clifford, you've got fresh approaches to playing this music from Max Roach, Richie. The rhythm section is doing some things never been done before. Clifford Brown is doing things on the trumpet that have never been done before and can't be done even now. I'll just say it, Cherokee. The only cat ever tried to play that like Clifford did was Whit Marsalis on his live album from Blues Alley in Washington, D.C. So yeah, Clifford Brown is setting the bar very, very, very high. And they do, you know, Brown and Roach Incorporated, and Clifford Brown and Max Roach, and they do a few different great albums. And then later, somewhere around 1955, they do at Basin Street. And by this time, Harold Land is gone, and they are bringing in a new tenor saxophonist in the name and persona of the great Sonny Rollins. And Sonny had been going through it a little bit because he had these drug dependencies and whatnot that had been plaguing him and affecting his career a bit and his playing. But he had convinced himself that in order to be a great jazz musician, you had to indulge. And then he met Clifford, who didn't use drugs and wasn't fond of alcohol either. He was just plugged into life. And Sonny was so impressed with that it gave him the motivation he needed to clean himself up. He said, if Clifford can play like that completely straight, then I can too. And maybe that's why Sonny is still with us, I think at 92 now, and still playing, because he cleaned up. And Clifford Brown not only set the bar high for trumpet players and jazz musicians in general in terms of the music, but he also helped to end that negative connotation that jazz musicians are a bunch of drug freaks and alcoholics. He helped end that because he was clean inside and out. Clean living, clean thinking, and did not have those intoxicants in his body. The band is jamming, they're making great albums. I think over his lifetime he recorded for only 4 years, 4 or 5 albums, and those albums have been this encyclopedia for many jazz trumpet players to raise their level of musicality, efficiency, creativity, you name it. I've had at least 2 trumpet students who were great. Carl Fish was one of them. And one of his favorite tunes was, "Man, I love the hound," as he would say, "the hound, man." All the cats I knew, trumpet players, they worship Brownie, and they should have, because Brownie is like that. So if you're not a trumpet player and you're not familiar with Clifford Brown, you need to be. He has a nephew who released an album in 2015 that released an album called Brownie. You can find it out there. And on that album, Clifford Brown actually plays. Clifford Benjamin Brown. But it is not the Clifford we know, because the Clifford we know died in a very tragic car accident, excuse me, with Richie Powell and his wife in 1956 at age 25. Yeah. This guy made this big noise in the world of jazz and was gone by age 25. You just kind of put that in your mind and think about it. But the album that was released in 2015 features Clifford Benjamin Brown III, who is Clifford Brown's grandson. I can't say enough about Clifford. Sandu is a tune. One of the most beautiful ballads ever written is "I Remember Clifford." I remember that in his development, coming through the messengers and before he put together the group with Max Roach, he played with various people, including Lionel Hampton and J.J. Johnson. I remember buying this book that said, "Play trombone like J.J." and had tunes like Ruby and Blue Moon, I Dream of Jeannie. And those are not tunes you hear a whole lot in jazz, and I never really heard J.J. play those tunes a lot. And then I realized that Clifford had played those tunes in his own personal way. And it so struck J.J. that when J.J. wrote his book, giving young trombone players like myself a glimpse into jazz trombone, he included tunes, or his take on tunes, that were not his favorites, but ones he's heard Clifford play in such a manner that they just had to be included. Clifford was not just this great technical player, and he was. Full range of the horn, as clean and fast as you want to hear, whatever you want, he's got it. Unbelievable swing. But man, he could play a ballad and just melt your heart. And what people say is when he played with his entire mind, body, and soul. There are only 2 video clips of Clifford. Because he came here so fast and he left here so fast that he was on a show by Soupy Sales, and someone recorded 2 video clips of him playing trumpet on that show. That is the only live video that exists of Clifford Brown, and they were not discovered until 1990. You know, almost 40 years after Clifford was gone. So although there's not a lot in terms of the number of things that he left here, there's a whole lot of music in every single groove on every single record he ever made. Yes, in 1954, the world saw him coming, and downbeat critics said, This is the new star of the year. And 40 years later, Downbeat gave him Lifetime Achievement Award. 40 years after he had already left the planet. Clifford Brown is a giant. And what he left us, the body of work that he was able to leave us with only 4 years of recorded activity, starting with an R&B band in like 1952 or something like that, to those wonderful things with the Messengers and those wonderful things he did with other groups. By the way, he also recorded some smooth, cool jazz in California at the same time that he was putting the Max Roach group together. You might be interested in those because I think they're more successful than the work Miles Davis did on Birth of the Cool. So go check that. I think Clifford Brown and the All-Stars or whatever, but it's on Pacific Jazz is the label. It's on. You need to go check that stuff out. Very, very nice arrangements, performed very, very well, and of course, great musicianship from all the players, including Jerry Mulligan, but Clifford Brown, man, even in that context, Clifford Brown made cool jazz hot. And that is the intensity of Mr. Clifford Brown. Just look at any picture of him when he's playing his horn. He is totally engaged in the process, intensely, like we will never witness again. We can all try to imitate, but it will never be duplicated again. Thank you so very much.